Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D. And we've got the research queen, Mary Osmond, on the show this week. And last week she shared so much knowledge and so much information on how to do due diligence and research. But this week, I think she's upped it again and taken it to another level because she shares her exact framework that you can copy to make sure that you are doing due diligence and your research the best way possible.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. Thank you for joining us. This is a show where we share the knowledge that we've gained over the years with you for free, including the knowledge that we've gained from running our multi-million pound property fund, which you can find out more about at portfolio.co.uk. But once again, today we have a guest sharing her knowledge. And make sure you're listening and ready to take notes, because if you do just some of what Mary's going to share with you today, you will be a far better property investor for it. And also make sure you stick around all the way to the end for Hub Extra, where I share a tool that I've been using recently to get more out of my time online. And make sure that you are following the show on your favourite podcasting app. So on Apple Podcasts, just hit the little plus button. On Spotify, you can just hit follow, and that will make sure that you get every episode downloaded to your phone.
Okay, Rob, so it's time for our news story of the week, and the headline is almost an article itself. The headline reads, "The bank knocked £35,000 off the price we agreed. Mortgage lenders put the brakes on runaway house prices with a surge of down valuations." This is from the This Is Money website, and it appears down valuations are taking place across the country. But one of the worrying subheadlines to this article is house price growth is slowing amid predictions prices will fall 3% next year. So we're getting down valuations, Rob, and predictions of property prices falling. When you read headlines like this, is it time to get in the bunker?
I think predictions, plural, is generous. I believe it's one prediction that says prices will fall next year, at least one that I'm aware of and one that they've actually referenced in the article. But the whole down valuations thing is interesting because this is in the context of house prices being up 12.1% over the last year, which is obviously like massive. And given that houses are valued by people and those people's responsibility is to the lender, and they can get in trouble if the lender ends up losing money on a loan, it's natural that they're going to get concerned that if they give something a valuation now while everything's red hot, that could end up coming down. And so they're being a bit cautious. That, of course, is somewhat self-fulfilling because if everything gets down valued, then the valuation of everything is by definition lower. And this seems to be happening. This is all kind of anecdotal, but one broker quoted in this article says that a fifth of clients are now receiving down valuations. They say that they've doubled over the last few months compared to the rate that they were happening at. I don't know, Rob, I don't think this is surprising for the reasons I've spoken about, but I think there's quite a bit of distance between house prices growing at 12% a year, people getting a bit cautious, and house prices falling. I think we've got quite a bit of room to play with in the middle there.
Yeah, but that's not as exciting as a news story, is it, Rob? So you've got to be a bit sensationalist to get the clicks these days. So, no, it's a long way off. For me, the real story here is how we value property. So first of all, I'm going to just hold my hands up and say I don't have a solution. And I don't like to criticise a system if I don't have a better way of doing things myself or a suggested better way of doing things. So I'm not going to go too heavy on this. But the way we value properties to me seems so archaic. An individual will go round, they're called a valuer, and they make a subjective call on the value of a property. Now, you could immediately think, well, they're professionals, that's their job. So why is that an issue? Because I've seen valuers value identical properties in the space of 2 weeks and come up with different numbers, vastly different numbers. And that's not once. I've had many, many accounts of things like that happening all the time. So for me, I think that is a flaw, that it's an individual's call on what a value should be. Also, while valuers are technically independent and give their view, they do get instructions from the banks, the lenders, on their view of the market and what they think and how they should treat certain properties. They don't go as far to tell them what to value the properties at, but they do give guidance on how they view the market right now. And that's not across the board. That's not every lender, but it does happen. I know that happens particularly in buy-to-let. So is this a case of the lenders getting nervous and passing it down to the valuers? Or is it the valuers being nervous and passing it up to the lenders? I don't know because I'm not part of the conversation, but I feel it could be a combination of the two.
I think that's probably right. And it is a very strange system because on the one hand, like willing buyer, willing seller, arm's length transaction, whatever price they agree at, by definition is the price because they've agreed it. And when you're looking at buying properties potentially below market value, that's how it works. Now, if you agree a discounted price because the seller is in a massive hurry or something like that, then that is the value that's given to it. They don't go, oh, great negotiating, I'll give you a mortgage for more. That used to happen, it doesn't happen anymore. Yet when they're concerned about overpaying, it goes the other way, and the logic seems to be different. I don't know what the answer is, and I wish I did, and I wish we had a better system, because as an investor buyer, a lot of the time it's annoying. It can mean you have to put more cash in, it can scupper a deal completely, but it's not going to change your life particularly. But for residential buyers, when you could have a chain of 5 transactions, if this randomly happens to one of those transactions, the entire chain can fall apart, and these are people who may need to move for reasons related to their life. So it really is a life-changing thing. So it does seem like a very strange and, like you said, Rob, archaic system to be governing something that is so important to so many people.
So we'll keep an eye on this. Is this just a couple of week blip, or is it a trend and it's something that we need to adapt to as property investors? We'll keep a watchful eye on it, and if there's any developments on this, we'll report on it in our market update, which happens the first Thursday of every month. Before we get into the main event and the main content of this week's episode, we just want to give you a quick reminder. We have lots of people that say, oh, you know what, I'd love to work with you guys and get involved. Well, you actually possibly can, because we're expanding so much at the moment. We have multiple roles live. As we record this, I think we have 9 roles live that people can apply for, and so many different roles, and based in different areas as well. So we got Manchester, London, and we do hybrid working, so you don't even need to live in those cities. As long as you can get to them a few days a week, then you may be able to be further afield and work at Property Hub and Portfolio as well. So if you want to see what roles we have live at the moment, go to propertyhub.net/jobs. It's a really exciting time at the moment. Portfolio is about to kick on. We've got the minimum investment down to 5,000 now, and it's going to go lower at some point soon. With that in mind, we need to keep building the team out, because more and more people will enter into the app. So as you can imagine, in a company that's growing fast, it's an exciting place to be. Won't suit everyone. Some people like the stable and steady, and that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But for those who are excited by the potential journey that we're going to go on, have a look, see if there's a role there. And if there isn't, then just come back to it next month, because there'll be more roles then. So keep an eye on it, because exciting things are happening right now. Word of warning though, if you think, oh wow, I'll get to work with Rob and Rob, we have had multiple people from the podcast join us, and they've been very disappointed a week or two in. But luckily enough, the rest of the team have more than made up for the disappointment in meeting us in real life. We're not that impressive, I can assure you. But hopefully our exciting projects, our fantastic team, and everything we're doing is exciting. And I'm sure off the back of that, plenty of you will take interest. So go check that page out.
On last week's show, we talked about due diligence, and we talked about how it's the key to not only giving you the confidence to invest in the first place, but also avoid some very expensive and nasty mistakes. It's so important, in fact, that we're dedicating another episode to it today. And because she had so much to share last week, and we really only scratched the surface, we've invited Mary Osmond back to guide us through her approach.
So this is the 3rd time that Mary's appearing on the podcast now. Her and her partner Andrew are both architects, HMO experts, and as you heard last week, they're not a fan of risk. They consider themselves risk adverse. And because of that, because they are so risk adverse, but they love property, to make them feel comfortable, they have really got to grips with doing research, due diligence, to make sure that when they make an investment, they're taking as little risk as possible. So what they've created is a framework for approaching research, and she's kind enough in this episode to share that framework with all of us. So I started out by asking Mary, where do you even begin with all this research? Because research is such a big beast. We all want to do it well, but how does Mary approach it?
We kind of carry out 3 scales of research. So this is important for our due diligence, and this is how we do it. And hopefully it can be a really good learning method of how someone can do a complete due diligence in an area. So we have 3 kind of scale research, and one is a macro scale, so large citywide research. The second one is a meso research, which is a medium and more like an area-wide research. And then the third one is a micro, which is a small research, which is kind of streets, houses, and all that kind of stuff.
Okay, so let's start with a top level or macro.
So in terms of the macro research, it's a very large scale research. When you are first going into an area, and this doesn't necessarily need to be just at the beginning of your property journey, it could be after a while, you might exhaust that area and you might want to move into another area, another city, for example. So macro research is like citywide research, and we start by having a look at kind of understanding what the city has to offer. So has it got universities? Has it got lots of really good transport links? If it's a town, is it a really great satellite town? Is there any good government funds and things like that coming in? What's the future investigation? What's going to happen in the future in the city? Is there any initiatives for the city to become bigger, or is it becoming kind of like city of culture or something like that? Is there going to be money injected into the city? So that's really important to kind of investigate. Some investigations that you can do as well is just literally getting a map and understanding all the area postcodes in that region where, for example, the train stations are in the city, and you can start to build up some patterns between cities, which becomes really, really interesting actually. So you can start to map out similarities of your cities. When we research cities in so much detail that you can start to understand cities a lot better, and then you'll start to kind of investigate and start to know what your area should be. So for example, where the universities are generally, they like in the north and in the south, the locations of them actually will start to build up some patterns. In the train stations in the north, almost always on the south of the city, is because it's the easiest place to put it in, because you don't go through the city centre or something like that when they actually track out lines into the country. And so those kind of things are really important, and they start to pattern out and tell you where the good areas are, where the bad areas are, and things like that. Then you can start to approach, and if you're not in the area, you can start to just contact state agents and things like that to understand each area really well. And if you've got a strategy where you're kind of where the student areas are, postcodes are, where maybe an Article 4 postcode is, and where kind of bad areas are and things like that, because they'll tell you where good areas and bad areas are equally alike. So they're quite helpful. So there's lots of desktop research you can do, and there's lots of actually asking people how things are and how things work you can do. And that's at the really big level. And you can start to as well understand financial markets and where the spikes of booms and busts are. So you can really go all out to investigate spaces.
Awesome. Okay, so that's the top level. And yep, you may have guessed it. The next level we're going to look at is the middle level of research.
So the medium one is area-wide. So why is area-wide investigation important? Is because you want to, once you start to understand areas and you say, okay, I want to go into this area, it's really understand what that area is going to give you in terms of your strategy. So again, your end user is really important here. So you want to understand the supply and demand, and you can start to do that. So for example, we've got a HMO portfolio, and as a very risk averse person, I started to create lots and lots of research methods so I could understand whether an area for our strategy of HMO was actually the right area for us, and actually we were going to meet the supply and demand. Because I'm such a scary cat, I wasn't going to take any chances at all. So we picked an area that through our research, so we did the citywide research, and an area came up as an up-and-coming area. So we were like, great, this is an up-and-coming area. It has a train station that has fantastic links. It's not right in the city centre. It had a growing HMO population, which was great. And we understood that there was new shopping centres in that area, an existing one, and there was going to start to be work in that area. So we were like, okay, there might be a good opportunity here. but we'll look at kind of our worst case scenarios and best case scenarios. There weren't too many examples of HMOs or kind of selling and buying HMOs. So I wanted to get into the nitty gritty of it. So what I did was start to create these spreadsheets and really investigate things like Rightmove and Spare Room. So what I did was on Spare Room, there's kind of a drop down link where you can investigate where the supply and demand are. So there's rooms to let, so you can have a look at how many rooms are available in the area to let. And then you can do a click down where there's how many people are looking in the area. So you can do a very high level research of how many people are in the area and how many people are actually looking in that area, do a really high level understanding of if that area is going to work or not. I kind of took that to a different level, whereas on the spreadsheet, I started to look at a 15-minute radius walk of all the HMOs from that train station or the shopping centre in that area outwards. And on that one day, I started to write down every single HMO room that was available. So there might be a 10 or 15 or something like that. And then I started to populate the quality of those rooms. I started to populate how much they cost, the rental factor. So I gave it lots of different factors that might contribute in that room going or not going. And every week I would investigate whether that room had gone or was it still available. And in that way, I could understand what the area's demand was for higher or lower end areas, lower end quality rooms and houses, and what kind of the appetite for that area was. How quickly did rooms go, or how slowly did they stay, and how much for. So I understood kind of like the average amount of rent in that area. And that kind of gives you a really, really good indication of what your appetite is and what your risk appetite is. Do you want rooms flying off the shelf, or are you happy for it to be quite steady, but you're actually over the month, you're able to fill your rooms? So I thought that was a really good research for us in terms of Spare Room. And then in terms of Rightmove, we do quite a lot of high-level research into areas and into properties. And we actually have systemized the whole thing with our VA, and we've created some crazy systems, again on Excel, to research areas on Rightmove. So actually we're able to stay away from it, but setting up the systems on Rightmove, they're great programs actually, where you can start to set up areas, and every day it sends an alert, and that alert then gathers into a data sheet for us that our VA runs. So what we did in early days or in new areas was, with all the houses that come on the market, we were able to investigate what houses they are, who the end users were, for example, what the strategy was it buy-to-let HMOs and all that kind of thing. And then we were able to start to see the average prices for that area, and then investigate what parts of the area, or even kind of road-wise, what parts of those roads and everything like that, we were able to start to buy in, because we thought they were good areas and they were affordable. Because what you need to do in your research is, when you research these areas and find the averages, you actually then can find the uplift in that. So say you've got 10 houses, and the average price of buying a house is a certain price, and then you actually look at the ceiling price for the area. And if you can up the value of your house as much as what that house and that ceiling price area is, then you know that you can actually pull out that amount of money, which the ceiling price is in that area. So, that's a really good meso research with Rightmove and Spare Room that you can do in terms of areas.
All right, so a lot of analysis in the middle tier there, which then brings us on to the really focused micro level of research.
So in terms of the micro level, you actually want to get to the area and want to be walking the streets in that area. So if that research only takes place, maybe you want to go over 2 days or something like that. If you're not local, then you want to actually walk those streets and understand how you feel in those areas, right? If you feel great, somebody else is going to feel great. If you feel like it's a bit difficult and you see a clientele that you think might not work very well, then that's a really big red flag for doing your due diligence and doing your area research. And then again, in terms of the micro level, speaking to people is really important. There's only a certain extent or certain amount of information you can take when you do desktop research. We all do love desktop research. I love it. So easy not to speak to people, right? So intimidating when you have to kind of walk around or talk to agents and you want to pull out some information from them. But please, please do it. I know it's a bit intimidating, but it's brilliant to contact lots of agents. Letting agents are brilliant. If you want to do flips, sales agents are really, really useful. So they actually go into areas, roads, what road not to invest in. You know, the agents at the end of the day, they find it difficult to sell a house on a road. They will tell you because they don't want you to buy a house in that road, or they don't want to be letting a house on that road. So similarly, they'll tell you about it as well. So I think that's really important. And then tell everybody what you're doing. So that's when you kind of going to property events is really great in that area, because you can literally say to somebody, I'm considering purchasing a house in this area. For example, most recently, we actually looked at a new area too, because we want to kind of broaden our horizons. So in this new area, we did the street walking, we drove around all the areas and things like that. We did all the desktop research to understand what areas were good and bad and located near the university, the city centre, train lines and stuff like that. And then we went in there and actually started to, in our viewings, we started to talk to the neighbours and people, etc. But it was only when we were at a property event, when somebody else was investing in the area, we set up a really great call with them, and they told us that the area was quite saturated. And because of the saturation of the area, it wasn't that we couldn't invest in the area. Because of the saturation of the area, it means that the rental demand that you can demand from the end user is lower now than it used to be when it wasn't saturated. So in terms of our return on investment, that kind of puts us into a more difficult position if our rental amounts are lower all the time because of the saturation. So that's fantastic. So just getting information from people who are doing it there is priceless. And so we think that's really, really important to do.
Wowzers. We are so lucky to have Mary on this week. Again, thank you, Mary. If we carry on, we're going to have to put your name on the podcast with all the episodes you've given us now and all that knowledge that you've shared. We really, really do appreciate it. Rob, you know what's great? We talked about how important research is, but we've also talked about how intimidating it is to even begin and what to look at and how to go about it. But what Mary shared today is a simple process to follow, which makes what is a bit of an intimidating project to undertake, researching a property investment opportunity, into quite simple steps. And when you approach it from this way and tackle each level one at a time, then you're going to make better decisions. You might not get it right every time, but if you follow this process, you're going to get it more right than wrong.
That's right. It's really useful to have a framework to follow. There is so much that you can do, and there's so much information out there, which is great, but you can just kind of leap around looking at random bits. And this kind of progression from the macro down to the micro is something that I think I do naturally, but I hadn't thought about it in such a structured way. And I think deliberately following that approach, maybe even building out a checklist for each layer, means that you're not going to miss anything. And that's important, because what you should be doing when you're doing due diligence is looking a lot of the time for reasons to say no, looking for reasons why something won't work. What a lot of us end up doing when we're doing due diligence is actually trying to find reasons to say yes, because we want to do the deal. So if you approach the process randomly, you can be biased towards looking at the things, even if it's subconscious, that you think are going to be good, and look at those, but miss something very important that actually could be a serious warning sign, whether that's just about how the property relates to your strategy or a warning sign about the property in general. So having the discipline to follow this kind of process, even though it's pretty simple, means you're going to gather better information more quickly, and you're far less likely to miss something that's going to cause you trouble later.
So it's time for Hub Extra now, the part of the show where we like to give you more. And this is all backed up by the Hub Extra email, which goes out each and every Friday. And we aim to make that email the most valuable email that hits your inbox each and every week. And to get that email, it's absolutely free. Go to propertyhub.net, sign up, where you'll then get the Property Hub Extra email, but then you'll also get access to the forum, all the free courses, and so much more. It's the best deal in property you'll do this year, this century. But if that wasn't enough, we want to add more value here, and that's why we do Hub Extra each and every week on the show. And Rob and I were having a bit of a geeky conversation about browsers the other week and what browsers we use to surf the web. And previously, we've both used Brave. But Rob, you've gone and upped ship to another browser, and I've started to look at it, and I can see why you've moved, because it looks awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I've got a thing for browsers though. Like we talked last week about how you're always optimizing your phone. I do spend a lot of time on my phone, but I also spend an enormous amount of time at my laptop. And so I'm always looking for that little upgrade there. And the browser that I've moved to now is called Sidekick. It's at meetsidekick.com. And there's a few cool things about it. The first is kind of similar to Brave that you use. It's got an ad blocker built in, which means it's super fast because all the ads and the trackers from various services as well that tend to get loaded with every web page, it strips out. So it means that everything loads faster. It's also got a sidebar that you can use to pin the most common web apps that you use. So, for example, I've got WhatsApp in there and I've got my calendar in there because they're two that I use all the time. So it just means that I can go over there. There's keyboard shortcuts for them as well. And I can get to those really quickly without having to load them up as separate tabs every time I want to use them. And the third thing that I like is that you can have different collections, which it calls sessions. I think you can do this in some other browsers as well, but it just seems to work really nicely. So it basically keeps together groups of tabs that you're using. So you might be using the browser for your day job, but then you've got a property session where you can just keep open everything that you were last looking at, all your Rightmove tabs and everything else. And you can switch really easily between the two and just pick up again from where you left off. So, Rob, in reality, there's no need for anyone to switch browsers quite as often as I do. And if you're using something like Brave or even Firefox, you're probably fine. But if you are a little bit geeky, check Sidekick out. And if you're using whatever the default browser is that came with your device, even, God forbid, Internet Explorer, if that's still around, then definitely check this out.
Well, as you know, Rob, I am a geek, so I will be checking that out in more detail. So thank you. That's lost me a few hours today playing around with that. That's okay, because I'll somehow justify it as work. Just like you can when you listen to this podcast, because, yeah, you know what? You're learning and you're investing in yourself. So well done on the last half hour's work you've just done. And join us next week for some fun work on Tuesday for Ask Rob and Rob and on Thursday for the Property Podcast. We'll see you then. Take care. Have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.